you have been doing this pretty nice, and at this point you already have a pretty, let's say, not functional, but with a very good look and feel portfolio using a single page application. This is everything the way as it is working. You already have some links, and we already have the button that shows the corresponding form where a potential user, a potential client is getting in touch with you. But of course, there is no live, there is not a backend for this. So this is what we are going to do during this section. We are going to bring this form to life, creating the validations, the logic, essentially sending the email and all of that. And well, during this class, we are going to connect this specific form with your backend. And eventually after that, we can go validate and perform any kind of action. So what we need is to essentially create the action in the backend, basically in the controller. Then we need a route where this form can send the request, and then we can handle all of the information in the front end and sending that to the backend. But before to go with that, we need to go to the Inertia.js documentation, and there we are going to look a little about the forms. Here you have all the possibilities. Remember, you are completely free to read the documentation. It is going to avoid you a lot of pain and of course bring you a lot of knowledge. And of course, inside these sections, we have the forms. And there we have all the possible details for the different frameworks that we can use. Of course, we are on Vue in the version 3. And there, essentially, what we have to do is to create a form, and then we can post using that specific form to a specific route. We can do even better using Laravel. Essentially, we have here the corresponding information. We receive the request, we validate it, as we are going to see in following classes, and then we return a redirection. This is in the backend. And of course, we can perform the validation. We can use even a helper for the form, which is going to be our life even easier. We can create a constant for the form and specify the elements, the fields that this form has inside. As you can see, essentially, we have different possibilities. We have different ways to perform that. And well, let's use some inspiration because this is fine. Already, Laravel Jetstream is doing that. It is sending forms. And for example, we have that for the JavaScript and in the login or even the register. So if we go to resources, JS, there we have in the Jetstream all the components. Remember, we have the buttons, we have the inputs that we can use and we have been using for our form. And then in the pages, specifically for the authentication, we have, for example, the login form. And there, as you can see, we have a submit event using the prevent. It's very important to use it. So the browser is not reloading and sending the information and another request. All is keeping the SPA experience. And it is calling a submit method. That means, again, that we can go and check the methods. And it is. Submit is using a form property saying, okay, I'm going to transform. Don't take care a lot about this. It is essentially a way to transfer the information, for example, the remember token or something like that. But essentially, this is using the post method. So it is going to be a post request to a route, in this case, the login. And once it is finished successfully, we are going to remove the password from there, just in case that it fails, for example, saying that the user or the password are wrong. Now, the data related to this form, you can see this here, is essentially an inertia form. We are using inertia, basically as we see in the documentation, specifying that we have an email, a password, and the remember checkbox. Perfectly functional. So essentially, we are going to do the same. We can use or basically define this form component that comes already with inertia. We already have access to this, and then we can use the submit from this specific form to send the actual request with that information. So once we have this a little clear, we can go and do that with our own. So before that, let's create the backend structure. So let's go to our controllers. We have app HTTP controllers. We already have the controller. So let's start with a contact controller. So for this, we need to go now to our command prompt, which we have here, and we can execute PHP artisan make controller, and the name, as I said, is gonna be contact controller. Let's write this correspondingly, contact controller. And once we press enter, well, we already have this contact controller completely empty, of course, and there we are going to create an action which is gonna be contact. So we have a public function which is contact, and it is going to receive the actual request, the information that we are receiving from the form. So we have a request here, and just for now, to verify that we are correspondingly receiving the information, in this case the email and the message, we are going to use a dd with the request also. We are going to see what are we receiving from that specific form. That's all. Now we need to create a connection for this specific action from the routes. So let's go to routes, web.php, and there we are going to create a new route, of course. So this is gonna be route, this is gonna be post because we are receiving actual information, and we will be going to contact. And of course, this will go to our contact controller, the class, and the action is gonna be, once again, contact. And to identify this specific route, we are going to say the name is, you might be guessing good, contact. Perfect. Let's fix this. Let's import the definition of contact controller. There we have, coming of course from app HTTP controllers. And now once we have this, that means that we can send a post request to the route with the name contact and use it from our frontend. So let's go back to the frontend. We are on JS. Once again, in the pages, we have the welcome, and there we can use that as an action for our form. We already created the form. You can see this around here, almost at the end, the contacting form. And well, what we want to do is that this form, when it is being submitted, we want to act executing that specific, let's say, contacting form, or essentially, as we saw in the login, the submit action. So here we are going to have the add submit. Remember to use the prevent. It's very important to avoid a little weird functionality. And this is going to call a submit function. We are going to call this method submit. Then we need to go to our data of our JavaScript here. And then we are going to have in the set of methods a new one, which is of course submit. So this is of course a regular function, and what it's gonna do, as you remember from our specific login form, which is essentially using this form, and we are sending a post request to where? Well, we are going to the route, we already know the name, which is contact. Pretty simple. This form already will know the contents, the information that it is sending. So this means that we, of course, need to create that specific data. We have the contacting, for example, so we can have, of course, a form. What is going to be this form? Well, this is going to be a form coming from Inertia. Remember, this Inertia, very important to use the dollar symbol here, and we are going to send the form here. What is going to have this form? Well, we are going to initialize this form with an object saying that this has an email, which is going to start as an empty element, and essentially the same for the message. So at this point, this form that we are using here knows that it needs an email and a message. And the form is being used to send a post request to this specific route using that information. When is going to be this executed? Well, especially when we submit that specific form. So let's just see what is going to happen. Let's go back here, refresh to get the latest changes. It looks like we have a little error, so let's validate here. It is basically a syntax error, so let's go back to verify. Let's go back to the JavaScript. This probably here. We have the form, which is essentially this form that we have here with the object, and here is the problem. Essentially, remember, this is an object, so we don't have semicolons. We are just using a comma here to avoid any kind of syntax error. So let's try to verify again. Here it is. So let's chat, for example, and let's see what happens if we send some kind of information. Here we are not having any validation, so we can just try to get in touch. Of course, this needs to be an email because we are validating from the front end, essentially. It is not exactly a valid email, but this is just enough. And surprisingly, you can see how we are receiving, well, the email and the message, but for some reason, those are null. Well, this results, and this is expected because essentially we need to say what is going to change to the email or to the message that we are actually sending as a property of that specific form. So yes, we essentially created a form which has inside an email and a message. So we need to say that once the user is changing the actual value of this input, we are going to change the email in the form. And the same for the text area, or basically the message that we receive here. And well, that is perfectly possible using vModel. We are modeling, let's say, or linking the information that is in the input to a property into our JavaScript, and that property is used by the form to send it actually to our backend. So we are going to solve this pretty simple. We are going to use vModel, perfectly functional, and there we are going to specify what are going to model. So the value that the user inputs here is going to model, in this case, the form email, not the email, because we don't have a property called email. We have a property which is form, and that property was initialized with an object that contains inside an email. And we can do essentially the same in this case for the message. So once the user changed one of those values, automatically Vue, in this case, not exactly Inertia, changing this specific information. So once again, we can go back and refresh. Let's do chat. So we have another email. We have some specific message. And here it is. We are already receiving the information because, well, Vue is changing on real time the values that the user is typing. And then we are sending that back to our backend. And then after that, we can perform the validations, the specific actions, and all of that. So let's do all of those specific controls and actions in the following classes because we already connected our frontend and our backend. See you there.